Hello, welcome back. So in a previous video, I shared the actual recording session for an episode of Based on a True Story. In particular, the episode about Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. So I thought it would be fun to go through the editing process. So before we kick that off, just a little bit of kind of how I do things behind the scenes. So you'll notice that my setup is a little bit different from the actual recording session. So I actually record on a different computer than I edit on. And one of the reasons for that is really because of recording. I went out and I bought a really cheap all-in-one computer. Doesn't take much to process audio. And so that was, maybe a couple $100, I think is what it ended up being. And really what that's allowed me to do is to set everything up for recording, and then that's all I use it for. So when I sit down to record, I know that my settings are exactly the same as they were before. I don't use it for anything other than recording. So this is then on my normal desktop computer, and that's what I use to actually edit everything on, and that's what I'm on right now. So what we're going to go through is taking the file that we recorded. If you want to watch that video, you can, to see how we create that. And then this is the editing process for it. All right, so let's jump right into it, and I'll kind of explain as we go. So we're in Mixcraft here. The very first thing I want to do is to save this file as a new file. So I'm going to save as. Let's come in, and I'm actually going to rename this to version 1. And I do this for everything just so I know. So version 1 is basically the raw recording. Version 2 is going to be, I need to actually call it version 2. I don't want to replace that. Version 2. There we go. So version 2 is the rough edit here, and then version 3 will be the mix with music. Version 4 will be if there's errors and so on, and so it kind of continues on. So that way I know when I'm listening to a file, I know what version number it is and what actual what project file I can come in and make an edit to. All right, so let's get to the actual editing here. So I'm just going to go through it. If you have questions, I'll try to kind of explain things through, but of course, I'm not actually recording this live, so can't answer questions live. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'll try to either answer them there or maybe address them in a future video if we go through that. So as I recorded this, as I explained when I recorded this, this is going to be the intro. I know right away that I create a gap, so this is the 2 truths and a lie, and then this is the rest of the episode, and then over here is the outro, the ending part. So this really doesn't need any other editing. This is all in one clip, so this is pretty good. What I'm looking for here are the separate files here. So because this is actually separate, but they're still together, I know that this is 2 truths and a lie, but I know this is an edit point here. So I'm going to come in and listen to this real quick and find where that needs to be spliced together. Got him? Okay, now as you're... So that's that. Got him? Okay, so in that part, I need to find where that is in here. Planned Parenthood. Got him? Okay, now as you're listening to our... Okay, so this here means that I'm going to have to cut this up here, pull this in. That turned into Planned Parenthood. Got him? Okay. A little bit more spacing. Turned into Planned Parenthood. Got him? Okay, so that was a pretty quick edit there. One thing I remember from this in particular, I think I messed up the 2 truths. So yeah, so I recorded it over here. That's what this little flag is here. So let's actually bring this over. I'm going to delete this guy. And let's edit this in. So I think... Before starting our story today... I think that's actually the introduction. Got him? Okay, now... Yep, that's the same part that I just did, so... Before starting our story today, Okay, so I can just delete this. I know that that is the introduction there, and that goes all the way through. Got him? Okay, now... Got him? Okay, I'm actually going to cut this part off here. I recorded a little bit extra, I'd rather have a little bit extra to play with in editing than if not.
Got him? Okay.
Okay,
Olive's
so
aunt started the organization that turned into Planned Parenthood. Got him?
Okay, that's good. I like that timing. I like to give myself, there's a little bit of space here, but that's fine. I like to give a little bit of natural spacing, right? A natural timing. If you rush everything, then it seems rushed and it sounds like it's over edited, and that's not what I want at all. All right, so we're ready to go into the bulk of the main episode. Before we do that, I'm going to do something very important. Grab a drink of coffee. And that is something that I enjoy while I'm editing that you can't always do while you're recording.
You see, as the rise of... Well, I couldn't find anything in my research. You see,
So basically what I'm doing is I'm coming in and seeing, so while I'm recording, if you watch the recording session, you'll know this. If you did not, here's a quick kind of overview of that. What I do is if I make a mistake, so right here is probably a mistake because I can tell there's an end of a file. So I just stopped, right? So I didn't like something with the way that I did that particular take. So what I'll do is I'll go back to a previous sentence or a previous thought or a previous kind of place to splice that in. And so here in editing, I just need to cut off that little bit of extra verbs or extra words so it doesn't seem like I'm saying the same thing over again.
You see, as the rise of...
So that right there would be extra. So I just come in here, cut this off, and listen back for timing pretty much.
Could have happened. You see, as the rise of comics grew more... That could have happened. You see, as the rise of...
Okay, so one thing I'm going to do that I forgot to do at the very beginning, I'm going to come in and apply my effects. I like to actually apply my track effects to the voice. That way I can hear it a little bit better, and I can hear what it's actually going to sound like at the end. So I have an effects chain that I've built out here. So a bunch of isotope stuff, pretty much. And then I also have a master effects for everything. So now if I listen to this, it'll sound a little bit different.
You see, as the rise of comics grew more and more...
See, it's a little warmer, little bit of effects on the voice there. But I like to edit with that turned on. That way I know what it's going to sound like at the end. But it also helps, actually, you can hear breaths a little bit more that I will need to cut out, and that makes it a little bit easier to know where to take those out there.
So, as they looked for... That provided those, the child...
Now, I don't take out every...
So, as they looked for answers...
I don't take out every breath. I'll say that.
So as they look,
because I found, and this is something I really learned through experience. I used to take out every breath. Not for this particular podcast, but when I've edited audio previously for previous jobs, I used to go in there and take out every breath from voiceover talent or whatever, and it starts to sound too like overproduced, too edited, because when it's not like it's like if you take out every or every in some cases, yes, you want to take them out, but in other cases, it's one of those things where like it's how people talk. It's you expect people to breathe. So if you don't hear a breath in there from time to time, it can start to lose some of that conversationalist. At least that's the way I've always kind of
so as they
had it be, or
by the stories inside.
The way I think about that. So I don't take them all out. It also is just a lot of extra work. Really, it's work versus reward. People expect people to breathe, and so hearing a breath here and there is not really a game changer for the amount of work it takes to take them all out. So I'll take a few of them out at the end of edit points, but other than that,
influenced by the stories inside. So as they look,
I'm okay with them. So let's pull this over. These are my edit points here.
By the time the 1940s were 24.
All right, cut that, delete, move in. So I'm not really explaining how I'm with the keyboard shortcuts I'm using, but that was Control T. You select Control T cuts.
1924. By the time the 1924. By the time the
There we go. I'll pull this in a little bit more just in case. And I'm holding down Control and using the scroll wheel in order to scroll back and forth. Let go of Control, it zooms in and out. Just really fast. That's one thing I like about Mixcraft. It's just intuitive, at least for me in that way.
For example, while at the same time, those same in comics were safe. Through newspaper articles, while at the same time helping with Josette Frank as their on both sides. And that is exactly what they do. With Josette Frank as those same comics. For example, in one newspaper article from same comics were safe.
Okay, so here we go. So here's an example of where I'm not 100% sure.
For example, in one news.
So right there, I say, for example, in one, right? And over here, I just say in. And I think that's what my mistake was. But just to play it safe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull open the script here. Oh, I need to renew Office. So let's come in and find where I was talking about here.
Those same comics were safe.
So I said safe. Right here. So this is that part. So yeah, so for example, in one newspaper, so that's what I should have said. You can see that here. So that is the right edit point right here.
For example, we're safe.
So that was the mistake that I made there. Sometimes it's, if I say the same thing over, it makes it really easy, but sometimes I don't say the right thing. And so that's where I have to go back and just verify with the script real quick.
Comics were safe. For example,
there's a little bit more space.
We're safe. For example,
there we go. Edit this in.
Not to get too far ahead.
There we go. See, that one's a lot easier because I'm saying the exact same thing.
Not to get too far ahead of our story.
So the mistake wasn't at the beginning, it was at the end.
Sure. Help make sure.
I just trail off. I don't remember what I did there, but that's why I actually stop and start. That way I know those are the edit points.
Reading the comics.
There we go. Cut this in. Let's give myself some space here between those thoughts.
Reading the comics. Not to get too far ahead of our. Reading the comics. Not to get too far.
There we go. And keep on keeping on. So this is kind of how the process goes.
Today, it's carried on in the award. Today, it's carried on. Director there.
All right, so select, and then so there's two ways that you can edit here in Mixcraft. Either I could just come in and I can drag this in like I've been doing, or I can just select this track, and then, as I mentioned earlier, Control-T will actually cut that. So you can see it creates a cut there, and then I can just select this and delete it. You can use delete on your keyboard as well. I just used the menu there. That way you could see what I was doing rather than just hitting the key on the keyboard.
That was director there. Today, it's carried. That was director there. Today, it's.
There we go. So pulling this in.
According to William,
Another cut.
C. According I-S-C. According to William.
There we go.
And while that scene in the. Science.
Another edit. Cut.
And C stands for compliance. And while that scene in.
It's a little bit too much.
E stands for compliance. And while that scene in the classroom.
That's a little bit better. Every so often, you'll notice up here the little star. So watch. If I move this here, so you can see that little star gets added. That's pretty common in a lot of software. Basically, that means that it's I've made some changes to it and it's unsaved. So every so often, if you notice that disappear, it's because I'm just kind of in a habit of hitting Control S every so often to save things, just in case. So that's how that goes. Let's come in here.
After the class, the building. They notice Olive. After the class, the notices it too.
Cut this in. And moving on.
Elizabeth notices it too. After the class,
Here we go. Another one.
the husband, Elizabeth for friends.
So this is the editing process.
Whom are some of her friends? Elizabeth.
And usually, like when I'm not actually recording this, I'll kind of have something on. I personally, I like to work with the kind of background noise.
From their position on the, she can't look at the man and thinking. She says, but they.
Let me find this beginning here. Hold on.
From their position on the step.
There we go. So yeah, so I like kind of working with background noise usually.
To be their assistant. From their position on the step.
So I usually have, I don't know, something on TV in the background or something. I don't really pay a lot of attention to it, but I just kind of like having that noise in the background.
Then Elizabeth points out the girl slut.
Because in this part in particular, let me hold on here.
When Olive invariably rejects his advances, he will think that she's a slut. Then Elizabeth points out the girl.
So yeah, so usually I'll kind of have something in the background. Can't really listen to music while I'm doing this.
The movie seems confusing.
So I find kind of just having movie on or TV or something kind of going on.
Less confusing. The movie seems.
I actually do that a lot of times while I'm actually working on the episode itself, like while I'm writing or researching. I like to work with kind of some background noise. And so what I'll usually do is I'll have, after the initial process of actually watching the movie.
Speaking of which, this catches. She hasn't done it yet. Speaking of which, heading back to the movie. That's what the movie does.
Okay, so that's the edit point. So yeah, while I'm writing,
because that's what the movie does. Speaking of which, heading.
Oops. I wanna edit that.
Because that's what the movie does. Speaking of which,
there we go. So yeah, while I'm writing, researching, like I'll watch the movie first, obviously, and I'll pay attention, probably a little bit more so than typically watching a movie. So like, for example, this movie is a few hours long. I'll take a ton of notes. So here, I'll pull over an example here. Let me just, here we go. So let me pull this over the screen so you can see real quick. So this is an example of the stuff that I'll do. So I'll write this outline as I'm watching the movie. This is as I'm watching the movie. These are all the notes I'm taking, right? So this is exactly what's happening in each part. And, like the text and stuff that's set on screen so I can reference it later to double check. The highlighted parts are things, was this actually a thing? Did the baby party actually happen? So that was something that we talk about in the actual episode. These are the questions, was who are these people? Are they actually related to Olive? So we cover that in the actual episode. There's the questions that I have as I'm watching the movie. So that's kind of while I'm doing that. So typically, watching a movie, it's an hour and a half long or so. It'll take me a good 4 or 5 hours to get through that. And that's why you'll notice at one of these points, I think I said, I leave myself a note here. I stopped at 18 minutes and 37 seconds in the movie. And so that way, this was probably when I stopped for one evening and then picked it up back later. So I knew that, I could resume later on where I was at.
This catches both. Are you joking? Your mother. Bleh.
Mother? I messed that up.
This catches both. This catches.
That's the error. So that's kind of the basic process for while I'm watching the movie. It is quite time consuming.
Is Margaret Sanger. This catches both.
But it helps me to be able to reference it. So after I do that, I'll go in and actually write and research. That's where you see a lot of these here. A lot of this stuff are things that I found whether it be in newspapers, various things, various articles, books, all of these things. These end up being the resources on the actual episode. And that's not necessarily all of the resources. For example, this book was a great book, right? I read through this book a lot, and it really helped for this particular episode. But of course, this is just one link, right? And so there's a ton of stuff inside of this book that I can't really reference because it's inside the book. And so, so that doesn't always mean those are all the sources. There's also some times where, like, I'll find things, newspapers.com is a great resource. I'm kind of getting away from editing but newspapers.com is a great resource to pull in some of these things to reference. And I have a subscription there, but some places like, Ancestry and other places that have historical documents are great places for research, but you can't always pull those in here. And this is the type of stuff that, even though I reference it in here, you have to have a subscription in order to be able to access it. So I can't actually link that on the episode page for the episode. So it's part of the research that goes into it, but it's not something that anybody ever really sees other than you right now.
After Olive explained.
So that gives you a little bit of a peek into the background part, and all of that
is important. Margaret Sanger and Ethel Byrne is important. After Olive explained.
All of that really was to kind of say that while I'm writing and researching the episode, I do like to have background noise. And typically that will be, a movie or TV or something like that.
It started almost. That's Margaret Sanger. It started almost as soon as she was. It started. There
we go. There's the edit. So the writing and researching part, I can do while I have something in the background going on.
It started unwanted child. It started.
Move this back a little bit.
Unwanted child. It started almost.
And that's just the way I like to work with kind of background noise. A little bit going on.
Later, Olive would be after being told. Later, Olive would down the street.
I think that's the edit point.
Later, Olive would be raised by.
Yep, that's the edit point. Pull this in.
Jack went back to the bar just down the street. Later, Olive would. In the 1910s, women at all.
So cut this in. And you can see kind of how
any rights for women at all. In the 1910s,
how what's the right word? Repetitive, a little bit monotonous this is.
It was Ethel Byrne popular at the time. It was Ethel Byrne.
But that's kind of part of it.
It certainly wasn't popular at the time.
Hopefully you can understand what I'm saying kind of between the edits here.
Popular at the time. It was Ethel Byrne popular at the time. It was Ethel.
So yeah, that's kind of part of it. The monotonous. It's almost I enjoy the editing process. It's kind of relaxing.
The general idea is it just works. But when we see a lizard, and with a bit.
Where's that?
In the film, we see the general idea is true. It just works. The general idea is true, but it did test.
Over here. Yeah, so I enjoyed the editing process.
The lie detector test. The general
it's generally pretty relaxing, and just kind of, it is what it is. For the lack of a better term, it's pretty mindless, this part of it, because I'm just cutting out the this is just a rough cut, right?
In truth, it was a lot. In truth, it was in the movie.
So I'm just listening for pretty much saying the same thing, cutting out the unwanted part. That's all it
did
is.
On Olive, like we see in the movie.
And right here, I think I have something.
See in the movie.
Yeah, a little bit of breath there at the end, so I'll cut that off.
See in the movie.
The only thing...
In truth, it was
one of the key things with when you're editing, if you do edit anywhere that there's a breath, you want to make sure that you're not editing like halfway through, because even though people expect breaths and they'll generally forgive it from time to time if it's not too distracting, if you cut and edit right in the middle of a breath, that's really obvious. So if you do edit, you want to make sure that you're not doing that.
For a while,
because otherwise it'll be really obvious that that's an edit point.
1932.
And what's funny is, especially after doing this podcast for, a couple of years now, I had done audio editing before for radio and stuff.
20th, 1932.
Not really for radio, I guess I should say, but I worked at a video production company, and we would do some radio spots that we'd sell alongside cable TV spots. That was where I kind of cut my teeth on a lot of stuff. We had an audio engineer that would
1932. For a while,
I was did some of the grunt work there.
32.
But I learned a lot there, and kind of one of the parts about that. Hold on.
It was in November. It was on November. The date was the date. It was on November.
Yeah. So I forgot where I was going with that. I was talking about
that wasn't a lie. Was the date. It was in November.
Make sure that you're editing there. I can't remember what I was talking about. Sorry. That's how it goes sometimes.
That truth was that William. I don't mean to make it sound. That truth was tolerance from other people.
I remember that I was talking about breath. Let's see if I can figure that out. Hold on.
Stares and intolerance from other people. That truth was that not always she lived with them often. But she lived with them often. Not always.
A little bit closer in.
She lived with them often. Not always.
Yeah, I don't remember what I was talking about. Sorry. Maybe we just move
Olive's
on.
editor didn't know.
If it was important, I probably would remember, right? Is that how it works? Not always.
Olive's editor didn't know. No one who read Olive's editor didn't know that Olive's editor Marston. Just you guessed it, Dr. William Marston. Olive's editor didn't know she was living with Dr. William Marston. Olive's editor did. It was this article.
Moving on through the edits.
William said that comic books were good for kids. It was this article that
A little bit more.
good for kids. It was this.
I try to, in this pass, even though this is a rough pass here, I try to get all the timing laid up so it's essentially all one big block. That's why I'm kind of moving things around a little bit.
One of the ways was by having Dr. Marca. One of the ways.
Yep.
And who spread comic books across America. One of the ways
So that's kind of a long pause there. I might cut it in a little bit, and that's what I mean by kind of
books
getting
across
the
America.
timing right.
Spread comic books across America. One of the ways
That's good.
Finally, one could look up to.
Go.
Someone that girls could look up to. Finally, William won.
There we go. So Wonder Woman starts becoming an inspiration for young girls. Previously, comic books were really just kind of a boy thing, and Wonder Woman started to change that.
Dr. Bender, Manhattan, by the way.
Which is cool. I learned a lot about. I mean, I've always been a fan of.
That's in Manhattan, by the way. Dr. Bender
Wonder Woman and comics and.
That's in Manhattan, by the way. Dr. Bender
So I learned a lot researching this episode. Hopefully, you'll learn a lot by listening to it once it's done.
A bit of City in 1952.
It's always cool to kind of see how, characters and some of the beloved characters that we grew up with, what their origin stories are.
In New York City in 1952. A bit of text. Apartment in New York City in 1952. A bit of text at the end of the movie talks about Wonder Woman.
There we go. So nearing the end here. Looks like. Yep, this is the end. So almost over.
27th, 1993. 1 month and 1 week after her 100th birthday.
All right, so that is the ending, and this is, I believe, the beginning of the outro.
This episode.
Yep.
Number 1. Number 3. Olive's mother and Number 1. 2 truths and 1 lie. Number 1.
All right, so number 1, delete those, move this up.
Here are the 2 truths and 1 lie. Number 1. William Marston. Here are the 2 truths and 1 lie. Number 1.
There we go.
And that brings us to an end of our Based on a True Story is entirely. And that brings us to an.
This is the ending, very ending. And here we go.
We're all life partners. And that brings us to an end of our We're all life partners. And that brings us to an. Thanks so much for listening. And I'll chat with you again really soon.
All right, so that is the end of the rough cut here. So I have everything kind of in its place. Introduction, 2 truths, a good edit on the episode, and then the ending here. So let's save this as version 3. And now it's time to come in and start adding in our music. So add in a new track. This is my music. And now is the point where I kind of come in and I find some music. And this is something that it's going to vary. So let me open up a new browser window here. And let's go to Audio Blocks. That's where I get most of my music for this. I say most of, all of it. And so what I'm looking for, if I come to the introduction here, and I always have different music in the introduction. I try to kind of make the music go along, kind of help suck you into that world, right? So in this case, this world is for Professor Marston, it's kind of set in the early 20th century, so the early 1900s to like the 20s and 30s, kind of a little before World War II, so kind of a classical type period. So I'll probably go for something kind of classical.
Superheroes have made their way onto the big.
And then we also have the superhero element as well. So let's see what we have here. At the end of the day, too, something that I find with my own when I'm listening to stuff too is that I like piano classical. It's just good. Something too is you're not listening to the podcast for music. Music, if you want to listen to music, you're listening to music, right? So just a little bit to kind of get started, but it's not the star of the show by any means, hopefully. Just listening here. Let me see what recent stuff they have. Nope. Nope. Ooh, for release. I might go with that. I like For Release. That's a good song. What is this guy here? I wonder if that would work for the intro here.
Our movie today begins as we see two children, one boy and one girl.
Yeah, let's try that. That Bach piece. That's another good classical piece here. So what we'll do, I have those. Let's pull them in, and I'm off the screen here on my second monitor. These guys are downloading. You can see it's downloading here. So while that downloads, let's come in here and let's actually pull in. I've got my. Sorry, I'm off the screen here because I need to pull in my file here. So I have a bunch of stock audio. These are basically things I've grabbed from audio blocks that I've used in previous episodes. And for this one here, I know I need this. This is my ending music. So I need this guy here. I'll pull this over to the end while the other thing downloads. So that'll be ready. And let's check on the downloads here. It looks like they are still going. That is pretty slow. You can see the download still going. Alrighty, well, I guess while that downloads, and this is why sometimes I could pause the video, but I'll just let it go out. So we're just kind of waiting for that download there, pretty much. Let's make sure that nothing else, while those are downloading, we need to make sure that there's nothing else that stands out to us. How's that? Be productive. What is this? Play. Yeah. I kind of like that. Whoever the guitarist was needs to really not slide on the strings that much. Sometimes you can't avoid I don't know about that. No, I've used that one before, though. No. All right, so this is almost done up here. It looks like you can see a little progress bar. Almost. How am I taking so long? I have a fast internet speed. Alrighty, well, I think I'm going to stick with those two. Unless there's something in... Yep, alright, so for release is done downloading. Let's take this and let's move this to my audio folder. There's for release. And let's get started with this. So here we go. Pull this in. the very beginning. All right, so that'll be a good kind of natural break point right there. Oh, looks like the other one's downloading too, so let's pull this guy in. And not over top, so here we go. Come on. There we go. All right, so I have that guy in there too. All right, so now we want to level this a little bit.
Superheroes have made their way
Right there. And then this I'm going to bring down, and it's going to get even quieter. Because again, music's not the star of the show. Story. I'm the star of the show. Story's the star of the show.
Superheroes have made their way onto the big screen in a big way. We've seen the stories lifted from the comic.
I'm going to actually make that quieter a lot faster.
Superheroes have made their way onto the big screen in a big way. We've seen the stories lifted from the comic books or graphic novels, if you.
I like that. Okay, so I'm going to pull this in one more time. And then over here, what I'm going to do is on the ending. So it's going to fade out, and hopefully then you're going to kind of get stuck into the introduction and kind of talking about the actual movie. I don't play it through the entire way. And then coming in at the end, it's going to start to come back. Let's try this.
To the world. On the DC side of the superheroes, there's Superman, the aforementioned Batman, of course, and the most popular female superhero of all time, Wonder Woman. And it's Wonder Woman that we're going to learn about today as we explore her origin story in real life by comparing history with the movie all about her creator, William Moulton Marston. I'm Dan Lefebvre, and this is based on a true story.
Okay, so I like that. It kind of starts coming in right when you hear the words Wonder Woman. It's kind of, okay, that's the end of this introduction, and that's kind of it's not really a big reveal, but that's kind of the reveal. We're going to talk about Wonder Woman this episode. That's the story.
William Moulton Marston. I'm Dan Lefebvre, and this is based on a true story.
And this comes in. There we go. I like that.
Before starting our
And then
Feb, and this is based on a true story.
actually, let's give ourselves a little bit more room here. So I'm going to take all of this and move it so it's right here.
And this is based on a true story.
I like that. So it kind of ends right here. And then, let's pull that out. Kill it. Oh, I have to actually delete it. That's right. I'm thinking curves in Photoshop or Lightroom or something. It'll let you just drag it and delete it.
Lefebvre. And this is based on a true story.
I like that. So it kind of, that last little bit there gives us a little bit more room, a little more, we're not rushing things.
There's Superman, the aforementioned Batman, of course, and the most popular female superhero of all time, Wonder Woman. And it's
so again, you kind of start to hear it very briefly in the background as we talk about Wonder Woman, as that comes in, kind of like that. And then our two truths and a lie game is going to come in right on the tail end of this. A little bit of overlap. I like to give 10 or 15 seconds between, so that gives us the good timing.
Before starting our story today, let's...
Perfect. And then find a little bit of music here. Do something a little bit different here.
And now, Let's learn all about how Wonder Woman came to be as we learn about the movie Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman.
Oh, too much time there.
And the Wonder Woman.
Pull this down. All right, let's try this. Let's see how this sounds. Might be a little too energetic. Might have to find something else. We'll see.
Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. Our movie today begins as we see two children, one boy and one girl, pulling a red wagon along a sidewalk. Their parents are there, and as they
Yeah, that might be a little bit too energetic. Let's see. Let's find something here that's not quite as energetic. No. Huh. Reminds me of The Office. What's something that's going to be really... Maybe adventure? Nope. I like that. I like that better. It's less energetic, a little more. It's in major key, so it should be a little more optimistic, for lack of a better term. Not as dark sounding like a minor key, but a little more, little slower, a little more adventurous and superheroes and adventures and that aspect. And there's definitely plenty of struggle and sadness in the story as well, and maybe that'll kind of come across a little bit. Might be reading a little bit too much into a stock audio there, but we only need it for short period of time, and then we can move on to the story. But I don't want it to be too happy, because it's in the beginning, especially. It's not really a happy story at the beginning, because they went through quite a bit. All right, so let's pull this over. Here we go. So we have this guy here, and let's move it in. And I'm not going to delete this yet. I'm going to move it over just to see. So we're testing this guy.
And the Wonder Woman. The Wonder Woman.
I like that better. All right, so that's going to be my breakpoint right here. Right there. Hear how it kind of changes? So my voice is going to come in right there. So that's something too. So I try to keep the zoom out to select everything, because remember I did all the timing in the previous edit, so I don't want to pull just one there. So I want to pull everything. So my breakpoint is going to be right around here. Let's try this.
Our movie today begins as we see...
There we go. I like that. So let's change this here. It's going to drop down probably pretty significantly.
Our movie today begins as we see two children, one boy and one...
Maybe not that significantly. Actually, let's do this. Let's pull this down a little bit to begin with.
Our movie today begins as we see two children, one boy and one girl, pull... Our movie today begins as we see two children, one boy and one girl, pulling a red wagon along a sidewalk. Their parents are there, and as they reach a house, the kids go up to the house.
Okay. I like that a lot better. It's less energetic, but it's I think it fits kind of the tone a little bit more of, in the beginning especially in the beginning of the story, there's a lot more struggle and a lot more difficulty. Not that there wasn't difficulty all the way through, but that means I'm going to take this, pull it in again, and we're going to use the end. So I use the beginning and the end of each one to have that kind of consistent theme, essentially.
Olive Byrne passed away, 93, 1 month and 1 week after her 100th birthday.
I think that might be too early. Let me check. Yeah, so I want the break to be right around here. I call it a break. That's not right. It's I want the volume boost right there, roughly. And pull this in.
TV show. As for Elizabeth and Olive, they lived out the rest of their lives together in an apartment in Tampa, Florida. Until
you kind of start to hear the music in the background when we jump back to kind of how Elizabeth and Olive ended their lives.
As for Elizabeth and Olive,
how their lives ended,
As for Elizabeth and Olive, they lived out the rest of their lives together in an apartment in Tampa, Florida, until Olive fell ill. She was hospitalized, and on May 19th, 1990, Olive Byrne passed away. She was 86 years old. Elizabeth passed away on March 27th, 1993, 1 month and 1 week after her 100th birthday. This episode of Based on a True...
Move this in a little bit more earlier.
This episode of Based on a True Story was written and produced by me, Dan Lefebvre.
All right, so I like the way that kind of ended there. I'm going to pull this in a little bit, and then this is where our ending music is going to come in. So first thing first, we're down to negative 25, because that's what I always have it at the end, so it's just in the background, and then it drops in right in the middle here.
Produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. I mentioned this book story was written and produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. I mentioned
that seems like a kind of an abrupt thing. Let's actually do this.
Episode of Based on a True Story was written and produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. I mentioned this book earlier.
And then this plays all the way through, so I'm going to do the ending here.
Really soon.
Pull this up.
And I'll chat with you again really soon. Again really soon.
All right, so that is ready to go, and then this is a repeat, so pull it in, and then I need to find somewhere to hide that switch. So you'll get to see this, and now that you know where it is, you're going to listen for it more, I bet. but there's always going to be a point, and I try to make it somewhere that's a little less conspicuous.
And one lie. Number 1, William Marston was married to both Elizabeth and Olive. Number 2, Elizabeth and
where it doesn't quite, so it's never going to line up perfectly, right? So there's always one point somewhere in there. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's later. Actually, let's pull this back. It might work a little bit better right around here.
Elizabeth Marston. But I guess I can see if you'd say he was married to Olive too. After all, as we learned, Olive started wearing the bracelets that inspired.
No. Let's actually have it back here. The further back it is, usually the less it's noticed, because at that point it's just kind of it's still repeating in the background, just the track nature of it.
Life partners. And that brings us to an end of our story today. If you enjoyed today's story,
it's a good hide right there. And all right, so we are done editing our episode. So the next step here is to mix this down. So I'm going to come in to my folder here, copy this, and this is episode 116, version 3, and save it out. So while this processes, there's actually one last step that we need to do. And to do that, I'm going to open up Audition. So the last thing I will do on this is to crunch it down and level it, basically. So set it to, there's just a standard, there's somewhat standard in podcasting of -16. I think Spotify wants -14, but that seems a little too loud to me. So I'm just going to run it through a loudness thing here. Once this is done creating the actual file, so you can see it down here. It's actually creating it down at the very bottom of the screen. And this is a part where we just kind of wait. I'm just kind of waiting for it to finish out. While it's doing that, so I'll kind of talk about the next steps, and we're not going to cover this in this video because I'm not going to be doing this right away. But basically where I'll take it from here is I will take this file and I will listen to it myself. I also have a few good friends and family members that are donating their time to check these episodes before they go live. And really what they're listening for is, make sure there's no mistakes in the editing, make sure that I don't say things multiple times. If there's, accuracy things, if there's whatever they, can point out, they'll do that beforehand. And that's one reason why I like to work quite a bit ahead of time. So this particular episode is not going to be going out for a couple months. And that'll give time for QA, those people who are listening to it, and I'll listen to it myself and make sure I don't notice anything as well, to give some feedback. And I'll usually give them a couple weeks or so for that, and they're usually pretty good at getting a pretty quick turnaround on these episodes, because really it just takes, just listen to it, right? Listen to 37 minutes or so, whatever we're at right there for this episode. And then I'll integrate any feedback. So that's where the versioning system comes in. So you can see this is version 3. If I make an edit, I'll create version 4, version 5, and so on and so forth. And that way I know what project file goes with what version. And then from there, it's actually creating out the stuff on the website. Which is, creating the episode. I've got the transcript that I created. That's the script itself. That's the transcript. You saw all the resources. I'll create, links for those on the site. I'll create the graphics. which, I haven't figured out what it'll be for this particular episode yet, but I'll create graphics for that, put it up on the site, schedule it all out, and then it should be good to go. That's pretty much kind of how the process goes. And then I move on to the next one. And that would, be for this particular one. Now, I say I'm not going to do that right away, because one of the reasons is because I'll actually bulk edit things. So I'll batch process things, I should say. That's a little bit better terminology there, because, there's a very good chance that I'll actually get the next episode recorded and edited before I actually do the graphics for this one, right? And one of the reasons for that is for QA purposes, so that way it gets out to, there's really only, 3 or 4 people that are helping with that, and myself as well. I'll be able to listen to that in kind of a different frame of mind, different, from the audio editing side, make sure the episode's good to go. And then I'll create graphics for, a bunch of them back to back, and dump them into the website back to back, and upload them to podcasting hosts back to back, and, get all that, that way the scheduling is all kind of done at once, and the audio editing is kind of all done at once. And it's just a different frame of mind to be in when you're jumping between all these different tasks. Recording, kind of, you have to be in a certain mindset to record, and then you have to be in a certain mindset to do the audio editing, and kind of, as I had mentioned earlier, it's a little bit more of a monotonous aspect, and so you have to, just doing them all at once is a lot easier for me than to edit this and then jump to doing graphics, which requires, being a little more creative, and then jump back to this, and then jump back to that, and each time you're switching gears, and that switching gears just takes a lot of time. So I like to batch things that way. All right, so this is exported. So this is the file here. Let's hop into Audition. I'm going to pull this in, and this is a very simple process. Just drag it down, and basically what it's going to do is, you can see this here, right? So this is what the file ends up looking like. I'm going to run this. It's going to basically analyze it, and it's going to crunch it down, try to get a max of negative 3 decibels. That was from the time doing audio edits for radio spots. That was kind of what they wanted at the target, negative 3. So I've always kind of kept it that way. But then having a target loudness of negative 16 lufs, and basically that's going to try to have the quieter parts, bring those up, the louder parts, bring those down, and try to level it out so it's much more even across. And one of the benefits for this, and kind of matching this sort of a standard, is that what it'll actually do is, if everybody uses negative 16 lufs, then you go from one episode to another episode, you won't have to adjust the volume. And that's kind of the purpose behind this, is throughout the entire episode, it should be pretty consistent. So you're not like, how sometimes you're listening to something and it's like really quiet, and so you turn it up, and then all of a sudden it's really loud. This is trying to negate that, because you shouldn't have to do that throughout, a podcast episode like this. So should be pretty consistent, and then going with what is very often considered, kind of the industry standards, then that should help between episodes. So you listen to Based on a True Story, and then you go listen to, NPR, you go listen to This American Life, or whatever you listen to next. There shouldn't be too much difference between the volume levels. You shouldn't have to adjust the volume. That's kind of what that is. So
number 2, Elizabeth and all.
So there you go. We have it. It ended up being a negative 17, it looks like. It's kind of what it ended up with. Yeah, target was negative 16, and so I'm happy with that. Let's save this off, and it's going to be an MP3 file, 64. Crunch it down quite a bit, and it'll end up with a 17 meg file, which will be the final file. So for what's the final? I didn't see what the final time was on it. Let's save this real quick. Oh, here we go. The duration. So 37 minutes and 36 seconds, and we're at about 17 megs for that. So that's pretty good. And that is the end of this recording session. So we went through, or the editing session rather. If you watch the recording session, this kind of wraps the second, part 2 of that up, where we went through the actual recording process, and then this is the editing process, and you saw the rough edit, and then putting the music in, and rendering it down. Unfortunately, podcasts, as far as editing is concerned, as particularly one like this, where there's one, I'm the only host, the only person, and so it's really, really easy as far as editing is concerned, and just knocking it out is pretty much the task, making sure that there's no obvious mistakes there. So yeah, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate that. If you would like to see more types of these, kind of behind the scenes videos of the recording and the editing process, I can start creating these a little more frequently as I'm going through the recording and editing process. That's just a matter of setting this up and putting on the mic instead of watching TV or a movie in the background as I'm editing. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and we'll chat soon.